Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Shabbos Daf Kufchaf Beis contains two Mishnayos. It also ends the parak Kol Kisvei and begins the next Kol Kelim, which discusses the halachos of Muktzah. So the first Mishnah on the Daf begins the halachos of having a goy do malacha for you. If he's doing malacha, which is ostensibly for himself, when are you allowed to use his malacha, and when is it considered like he did it for you, and therefore you're not allowed to use it? Then the next Mishnah is the first Mishnah in the parak Kol Kelim, which talks about Kli Shemalach Isser, various devices that have a forbidden designated purpose. Are you allowed to use them for something else on Shabbos? So first of all, before we get to any Mishnah, the beginning of the Gemara until the first Mishnah is bringing three statements of Rav Abba Bar Kahana and the name of Rav Chanina. The first two concern the halacha of Muktzah Machmas Chisaron Kis. That is something which is Muktzah because you would never use it on Shabbos, because it is too valuable or it's too big, and therefore you set aside a place for it and you don't use it at all, and therefore when Shabbos begins you never have in mind that this is a useful thing, and we know that the halacha is that anything which at the beginning of Shabbos you didn't consider to be useful on Shabbos you can't use. So the first statement of Rav Bar Kahana and Rav Chanina is about the candlesticks of the household of Rebbe Yehuda Anasi. Those are very valuable, and Rashi explains that they were not screwed together, it was one large piece. So he said that you're allowed to move them on Shabbos and not in Muktzah. Obviously we're not talking about when it had a fire burning on it. And Rabbi Zera asked, what size are we referring to? Is it that it's small enough to hold with one hand, or that you needed two hands? And he answered, it's like the ones that you have in your house, which means that they're small enough to hold in one hand. But one which is large enough that you require two hands to hold it would be forbidden to move because it's too big. You set aside a place for a Shabbos, and you do not intend to use it the entire Shabbos. Okay, second statement of Rav Abba Bar Kahana and Rav Chanina. These light coaches, these wagons that Rebbe's household used to transport, so you're allowed to move those in Shabbos. Rav Zera again asked what size. Is it that it can be pulled by one person or only by two people? And the answer was like the ones that you have in your house, which is the same, also only can be pulled by one person. But if it's pulled by two people, then it remains unclear what halacha is for that. Now on the subject of wagons, Rav Abba Bar Kahana says the third statement, and that's wine, which was brought by Goyim in the household of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, only requires one seal. You do not have to have two seals. Normally, in order for wine to be considered kosher, if it was left under the care of a guy, requires two seals to make sure that there was no yayin nesach activities happening with it. But these only require one. And the Gemara says we're not sure what the reason is. This is because he holds like Rabbi Eliezer, who always requires only one seal? Or is it because since it was the house of Yehuda Hanasi, there is a automatic sense of fear? He was very connected with the Roman Empire and the government, and therefore the guy would not mess with his belongings, and therefore it's considered to be as if there were two seals. Okay, this takes us to the next Mishnah, which discusses the halacha of work that a guy did for himself. Is a Jew allowed to use it or not? So the rule of thumb here is that if the guy did it for himself for his own purposes, the Jew is allowed to use it afterwards. If, however, he did it for the Jew, then the Jew is not allowed to use it. And the cases of unclarity are where you're not sure what the guy's full intention was. Did he have in mind to do it for the Jew or not? So this Mishnah brings three examples. Okay, first of all, is if a guy lit a candle, as long as it was for himself, a Jew is allowed to use the light afterwards. If he filled up a trough of water to water his animals, a Jew is allowed to water his animals afterwards. And if he was on a ship and he made a ramp to be able to disembark from the ship to the shore, then a Jew is allowed to use the same ramp afterwards. All these three, it says that if he did it in order for the Jew to use it, then it's forbidden. And the Mishnah ends off with an incident here that Rabbi Gamliel and the elders were traveling on a boat, and they apparently landed on Shabbos. And a guy made a ramp to come off the boat, and Rabbi Gamliel and the Zakenim used it afterwards. Okay, now, first of all, the Gemara wants to know, why do I need all these three examples? We talked about candle, we talked about water, and we talked about the ramp off the boat. So the Gemara says, well, the candle is the least of a problem, because the candle light doesn't get used up. If the guy lit it for himself, it doesn't get used up. Therefore, there's no concern that he may have done extra for the sake of allowing a Jew to use it. There is no such thing as extra. You light the candle, the light is the light. Right? The candle gets used up, but the light doesn't get used up. However, the water in the trough, that gets used up. So it could be that the guy may have been aware that the Jew's going to use it afterwards, and he drew a little bit extra from the well for him. There, the guy may have done that extra in order for the Jew to use it. And that, if that's the case, and we have to be concerned about that, then we would say that that's forbidden because the guy drew that water for the Jew, not for himself. But we say that that's not the halacha. We don't assume that the guy did extra for a Jew, and therefore that is the chiddush of that case. And the third case doesn't really add anything, but we wanted to be able to bring in the story of Rabbi Gamliel on the Zakanim. That's why the Mishnah quoted the third case. Okay, the Gemara is now going to bring a number of other brises, and we're going to try to narrow down this rule a little bit and see if it's quite so simple. So the first brise is relatively simple, just brings two more examples. Brisa says that if a guy gathered hay or grasses to feed his animal, and the animal feeds, once he's finished and he is left, the Jew is allowed to go and use it as long as the guy didn't do it for the Jew. And the same thing is if he filled up water, the Jew is allowed to give his animal to drink afterwards. That's the same as we saw in our Mishnah. The Gemara asks, hold on a second, how are you allowed to go take your animal to feed from the grasses that were gathered by the guy? You don't have a problem of the fact that the guy did malach but there is a different issue, because we've seen there's a statement of Rav Huna in the name of Rabbi Chanina who says that you're allowed to take your animal to feed on grasses that are growing from the ground. You're not afraid that you're going to pull them out and feed it to him by hand. But on muktzah grasses which are disconnected, you shouldn't. You shouldn't take your animal to go feed there and stand on top of the grasses, because you may pick up some to feed to him. And it's muktzah because it was pulled out of the ground on Shabbos. It began Shabbos attached to the ground, therefore it's muktzah. So how is this guy allowed to do it? So Gemara says, okay, so the case is not where he goes and he pulls the animal, he brings the animal to the grass and stands with him on the grass. It's referring to where he directs the animal to go by standing in his way, and the animal goes and eats the grass himself, but he's not actually going to stand on top of the grass itself. Okay, now the Gemara is going to narrow down this halacha over here. So far we've seen that there is a distinction between whether the malacha is something that's used up, like drawing water, or it's something that's not used up, like making a ramp or lighting a candle. The light doesn't get used up. Now, it's not so clear though, because how are you supposed to know if the guy had in mind for the Jew to be able to use it afterwards or not? So here we're going to see some additional details as to whether the guy had in mind for the Jew to use it also or not. So first of all, we have a statement over here. The statement is that it's an Amar Mar, that all these halachas that is permitted only apply if the Jew does not know, if the guy does not personally know the Jew. If he personally knows him, we're afraid that he had in mind that he should be able to use some of this malacha that he did, and therefore it would be forbidden. So the Gemara says, okay, first of all, a few problems over here. Number one, Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel was traveling on the ship with the guys. Obviously he knew the guy, right? So how come he was allowed to use the ramp that he made? So here we're going to get into a machlekes. The answer to this question spawns a machlekes about this halacha between Abaye and Rava. Abaye says that it must be that the case was that he made the ramp when Rabbi Gamliel was not around. If he know him, if the guy knows the Jew and the Jew's around, it would be forbidden. We have to be afraid, even if it's something that doesn't get used up, like a ramp. We have to be afraid that he did it with in mind that the Jew should enjoy it. Now, that's Abaye's opinion. Rava disagrees. Rava says no, you don't have a problem over here, because it's something that does not get used up. The ramp doesn't get used up, therefore even if you know him, it is going to be, even if the guy knows the Jew, it is permitted, even if it's in front of him, as long as something that does not get used up. Therefore, according to Rava, anytime the guy performs the malacha for the Jew and it's something that doesn't get used up, it's permitted. According to Abaye, doesn't matter if it gets used up or not, it has to be that he doesn't know the Jew, or that he was not in his presence. The Jew was not around. So the Gemara, first of all, has a question on Rava. Rava said the question is on Rava. Rav Gamliel, according to a different version of this brisa, Rabban Gamliel said to the Zikanim, let's go down the ramp that the guy made, and because he made it when it was not in front of us that he made the ramp. So you see that it has to be not in front of him. So that's a proof to Abaye that the only reason why it's permitted is because it was not made in front of them. It doesn't help that it was something that doesn't get used up. So the Gemara answers no. He was just saying what happened. It happened to be that it was not in front of them, but it wasn't that was part of the reason. You didn't need that in order for it to be permitted. Okay, now the Gemara has a couple more prices over here. The first one is referring to a bathhouse. You have a city which is partially inhabited by Jews and partially by Goyim. The Goyim run the bathhouse and they heated up the water on Shabbos. So is the Jew allowed to use the water after Shabbos? Obviously on Shabbos he's not allowed to. Is he allowed to use the water after Shabbos? If the Goy made the water hot for the Jew on Shabbos, then it would be forbidden right after Shabbos. You have to wait until such time as the water could have heated up already after Shabbos. The reason for that is that the Jew should not benefit from the activity that the guy did at all. The fact that the guy heated up the water on Shabbos should not benefit the Jew at all. It shouldn't be that he can now take a bath faster. He has to wait the amount of time that he would have had to wait anyway had the water not been heated on Shabbos. Now, the question is, in what situation does this halacha apply? And the Raisa says the following thing. If the majority of the city is Goyim, we don't have to worry about it because assume he did it for the guy. If the majority of the city is Jews, then he has to wait. So the Gemara asks, but I don't understand. This doesn't fit, not like Abaye, and not like Rava, because it's not considered like the Jew was around. There weren't any Jews around when he heated up the bathhouse. And it's not something that gets used up because you have to heat up the entire bathhouse all at once. When you heat the water, you heat everything all at once. It's not like there's anything you can do extra for the Jew. So, according to both Abaye and Rava, it should not be a problem here because it was not in front of him, according to Abaye, and it's not something that gets used up, according to Rava. So the Gemara answers no. In a situation where the majority of the city is Jews, you assume that's what the guy did it for. This has nothing to do with other indications. If the majority of the city is Jew, when you heat up the bathhouse, your intent is following the majority. And therefore, this is considered like he did it specifically for the Jew if the majority of the city is Jews. Okay, another similar case, if a candle was lit at a gathering, so there the halacha is if the majority is Goyim, then it is permitted for Jews to use the light. If the majority is Jews, it's forbidden. If it's half and half, then it's also forbidden. So we have the same issue. The light, again, is not used up. And it's not, this is considered in front of him, so it shouldn't be an issue of Lefi Abaye, but it is a kasha on Rava. So the Gemara answers again, no, because the majority is Jews, therefore we consider like he did it specifically for the Jews that are there. Okay, now the Gemara ends off the perek with one incident. Shmuel went up to the house of Rabbi Avin, of Avin Turon. It's the name of a place, Rashi says. And there was a guy, he came and he lit a candle there. So Shmuel turned his face away. He was afraid that the guy did it for him as well, because he was there, he was in front of him. And I guess he knew him. That's an indication like Abaye, not like Rava. So Gemara says, but then Shmuel saw that the guy took out a piece of paper and he was reading it to the light of the candle. So he said, oh, he did it for himself, he didn't do it for me. And that again goes back to fitting with Rava, and therefore he went and he turned his face towards the candle and he used the light. That ends Perek Kol Kisvei, and now we begin Perek Kol Kalim, which discusses the halachos of Klisha Malachta Lesser. Now, Klisha Malachta Lesser is as follows. It is a Kli, it is a device with a function, it's not useless, which had the standard classic majority used function of this thing is for a forbidden activity on Shabbos, such as a hammer. You use a hammer to knock in a nail. You're not allowed to knock nails on Shabbos. However, there are other things you could do with it. And the question is, are you allowed to use this Klisha Malachta Lesser for other things on Shabbos or not? This is different than the types of muktzah which we've been discussing up to now. Those are things which have no function. Either they have no function because they innately are useless, or they have no function because you wouldn't use them because of their value or some other reason. Here, it has a function, and therefore it's not useless. So is it considered muktzah? It's not really muktzah. The entire issue over here is there some gzeira? Right? Defined muktzah, it's not. Muktzah means that it's useless. This is not useless. The question is there a gzeira which Chazal made that you cannot use these things on Shabbos even if you have a permitted use for them? So the Mishnah lists a long list of devices which you are allowed to use on Shabbos, and each of them is a Klisha Malachta Lesser. It has a forbidden function, and the Mishnah gives a permitted function you're allowed to use it for, and it's clearly saying that you are allowed to use these things for permitted uses on Shabbos. Just before it does that, it has one example of real muktzah, and that if you have a door that fell off of something. So here there's a difference. If the door fell off a house which is attached to the ground, so as long as it's attached to the ground, it's not considered to be a kli. It's not considered to be functional. It's part of the ground. Therefore, if the door fell off on Shabbos, it began Shabbos as a non-kli, and therefore it stays a non-kli even after Shabbos began, and it's forbidden to use the entire Shabbos. If, however, it's part of a kli, like it's the door of a closet or something movable, so that's a kli when it's part of the closet. Even when it falls off, it's still considered a kli as long as it has some function, and therefore it doesn't become muktzah now. Okay, now we get to the list of kalim that are malachta le'isur. So first of all, we have a hammer to crack nuts. We have an axe to cut cakes of figs, which are very hard. We have a saw to cut through cheese. We have a shovel to scoop out dried figs from a barrel. And we have a wide board, which is used for winnowing, or a pitchfork, which you might use to give food to a child. And then you have some other devices here. You have a device used for spinning thread, or you have a device used to separate the strands when you're weaving. Each of these things might be used for stirring something. You also have a needle. So a small one that's used for sewing cloth could be used to remove a thorn, a splinter, and a large needle, which people use for sewing sacking, that could be used to pick a lock. Okay, that's the Mishnah's examples, and now the Gemara begins. So the Gemara brings two brises, which are similar to our Mishnah, and it compares them to the Mishnah and learns a few halachas. The first one is about muktzah, the second one is about the halacha of binyan b'kelim, the halacha of building when it comes to movable objects. So first of all, the first brisa quotes the same thing, and it says all kalim you are allowed to move them on Shabbos, even a door that broke off, and even if it broke. So the phrase that it uses is even if it broke off on Shabbos. So the Gemara says, hold on a second. Even if it broke off on Shabbos, the only way you're allowed to use the door is if it broke off on Shabbos. If it broke off before Shabbos, so it's useless already before Shabbos. It's only if it broke off on Shabbos that you're allowed to use it because it was still part of the kli at the beginning of Shabbos. So the Gemara answers, yeah, that's what we meant. You read it like this: even though it broke off, it's not part of the kli anymore, you're still allowed to use it on Shabbos. That's what it means when it says even though it broke off on Shabbos. Okay, next the brisa discusses to take a door off or put a door back onto a closet or a crate or something like that. So the brisa says a shida teva migdol, a crate, a box, or a closet. You're allowed to take the door off, but you are not allowed to put the door back on. However, a chicken coop, which is like a small box as well, but it's built into the ground, so that's considered a building, it's attached to the ground, you're not allowed to take the door off or put it back on. So Gemara says, well, 1 second, I don't understand this. The chicken coop I understand. It's connected to the ground, and therefore it's building. And to take the door off would be stira, destroying, and to put the door on would be building. I can understand why they're both forbidden. But with the kli, the box, do you hold binyan mekalim is permitted or not? Are you allowed to build in a movable device or not? If you're allowed to, so then you should be allowed to both take it off and put it back on. If you're not allowed to, you shouldn't be allowed to do either. So how do you understand that you're allowed to take it off but not allowed to put it back on? So Abai says, you reread the Mishnah, it really holds that it's forbidden to do binyan on kalim and stira on kalim. You read it that if it fell off, then it's forbidden to put it back on. But it's not saying you're allowed to take it off. Rava says that doesn't fit. First of all, it says you're allowed to take it off. Second of all, it says avol. You are not, but you're not allowed to put it back on. If we were referring to where it fell off, the but there doesn't make any sense. And therefore, Rava says this Tana holds that it's not usher to build or destroy a kli. However, here there's a gzeira. You're not allowed to put it back on because you may wedge it in very firmly, and then it'll be finished, and it'll be a different issue called makabapatish, which does apply to kalim, not binyan. Binyan wouldn't be the issue over here. Okay, now the Gemara goes to the discussion of kalim shembelachton le'isr. So we have a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbah. Was our Mishnah really permitting a kli shembelachton le'isr to be used for a different function or not? When it says you're allowed to use a hammer to crack a nut, is that hammer shemachti l'isur? Rabbi Yehuda says no. That's talking about a nut hammer, a hammer that was meant to be used for nuts. If it's a blacksmith's hammer, it would be forbidden. That's because he holds kli shemachti l'isur is forbidden to use. Rabbah, however, disagrees. Rabbah says no, it can't be the case. It's referring to a blacksmith hammer, and kli shemachti l'isur is permitted to use for a permitted function on Shabbos. How do I know? Because there are cases in the Mishnah that cannot possibly be a device that is a specifically dedicated thing like a nut hammer. You could have a nut hammer, such a thing exists, but a winnowing board and a pitchfork, you don't have those in a permitted version. So there is no fork that's used to feed children. This is interesting. I guess that's how it was. And therefore, it has to be referring to where it was a forbidden version, and therefore the entire Mishnah is referring to forbidden versions. And the halacha is that even though it's a forbidden kli, it's a kli that's malach de'lis, you're still allowed to use it for a permitted function on Shabbos.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.